Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thank you so much for tuning in. This is a very exciting moment. Welcome to the launch of the Secretary General's guidance note on behavioral science. So we have a great keynote speaker and panel lined up for you. So let's just start by listening to a short message by the Secretary General.
Effective institutions need to be nimble and dynamic, constantly evolving to keep pace with the complex and changing world. In that spirit, I'm pleased to share a new guidance note on behavioral science, a tool that will improve the way we fulfill our mandates and administer our organization. Behavioral science helps us to diagnose how and why people do the things they do. Such information can be crucial for designing more effective programs and policies, from promoting public health to protecting the environment and reducing violence. There are also significant opportunities for applying this science to improve our internal operations and reduce bureaucracy. UN entities are already piloting this work in their operations, sharing lessons learned and collaborating through the work of the UN Behavioral Science Group of the UN Innovation Network. I look forward to working with colleagues across the world to realize the tremendous potential of behavioral science to help achieve the Sustainable Development Goals.
Great. Well, I'm now very happy to introduce my boss, Volker Turk, who is currently serving as Assistant Secretary General for Strategic Coordination in the Secretary General's office. And as many of you know, he worked for many, many years, decades actually, for protection and human rights of refugees at UNHCR. He was, prior to the current position, he was Assistant High Commissioner for Protection at UNHCR. So Volker, if you could just kick us off by telling us about the Secretary General's vision for UN 2.0 and this quintet of transformation that we've been talking about and how VSI fits in. Over to you, please.
Thank you very much, Ayaka. Great to be able to launch this behavioral science guidance note, and extremely pleased and honored to have with us Ambassador Samantha Power. It's a great pleasure to be again with you and to make sure that we are together on this, because it's such an important topic. And I just wanted to maybe set the scene by mentioning that in a way behavioral science and the guidance note has become part of a package, and you saw this with the oath of office that the Secretary General gave last week on Friday. In his vision statement, he talks about UN 2.0, he talks about this quintet of transformation. And I just wanted to quickly outline what that actually means. The quintet is, first and foremost, is data. I mean, the UN has probably the richest data set in the world. We sit on an enormous amount of data, but we have also realized that we are not using the data as efficiently and as effectively as possible, and we're not compellingly communicating the data. And we are the custodian of the long term. So in a way, our data set has to be made available to the world, and that really is absolutely critical. Based also on an overarching data strategy that we launched last year. So that's the first. It's data analysis and communicating what we know. And it feeds into some of those issues of evidence-based decision-making that is so critical in today's world. The second is, of course, innovation and digital. I mean, as a mindset issue, and it's not surprising that the behavioral science guidance note came out of the innovation group. Within there, about 4,000 colleagues, and I think there's a subset of about 400 colleagues who have been working on behavioral science issues for a long time. And that type of innovation is absolutely important for us. And we know that we can only enhance and improve if we actually embrace innovation as a mindset. The third is strategic foresight, very much linked to data, but also to innovation. And frankly, also to the discussions that we're having now about the UN 75 declaration and the common agenda, because we know that one of the big missing links in the governance regime is future generations and the impact of what we're doing on future generations. So the strategic foresight dimension is absolutely critical. We need, as the UN, link up with the different strategic foresight bodies, but we also need to do ourselves much better strategic foresight and make that available to the world. The fourth one is performance and results orientation. I mean, coming from UNHCR, there we are basically put to the test every year. I'm not sure the same type of performance and results orientation is sort of mainstream throughout the UN as a whole, and I think we really need to push for it. And the Secretary General wants to push for it very much to really learn, you know, what has gone wrong, where can we do better, what have we achieved, and to measure the success or the failures, and to move ahead better as a result. And the last point, what he in the vision statement calls work culture, is really behavioral science. It is the guidance note. It's making sure that our bureaucracies become much more nimble, not an easy process within the UN, because we sometimes accumulate different bureaucratic traditions from the whole world, but also in the way that we implement our programs, that we are able to do it bearing in mind our understanding of human beings in a deep sense. And that's what why the behavioral science, the guidance note, is so absolutely critical. So thanks, and very happy to be in this group. Thanks, Ayaka.
Great. Well, thank you so much for contextualizing this session. So now I have the great pleasure to introduce Administrator Power, who is very well known. So there's no introduction necessary, really, but the protocol calls for introduction. So Administrator Samantha Power is currently at USAID. Previously, she served as professor of Harvard Law School, but for this community, she's probably best known as former permanent representative of the US to the UN from 2013 to 2017. And of course, she is a prominent author and winner of Pulitzer Prize for nonfiction. List goes on, but I think people want to hear from you. So thank you so much for joining us and to be part of this this launch of the Secretary General's guidance note. So without any further ado, over to you, Administrator Power.
Thank you so much, Ayaka. Thank you, and thanks, Volker. It's great to hear you. And great to have your leadership on this. To the Secretary General, this can be a defining part of your legacy, of the UN's legacy from this period. And I should say to Antonio Guterres, congratulations on a second term. This gives you plenty of time to implement what is enshrined in the guidance. Grateful to the UN Innovation Network for inviting me to kick off Behavioral Science Week. This is a great honor. And again, gratitude to all of you who have labored, sometimes in the trenches, sometimes without a lot of fanfare and notice. But it is clear that behavioral science and its use is coming to the big stage there at the United Nations. I may sound biased in doing this, but I have to give a special shout out to someone who has been supporting the UN in its efforts to apply behavioral insights, and that is my husband, Cass Sunstein. Cass, I have learned tremendous amounts from you on this topic and every other topic on planet Earth, and seeing nudge units and behavioral insights units pop up all over the world in so many countries and cities, and now at international institutions. Not only is it intrinsically important for the improved development outcomes that incorporating these ideas bring about, but it's also thrilling to see how much ideas can matter in the real world. And that is what you have shown again and again. So thank you. And I'm lucky to get to benefit from hearing from you on this and all ideas every day. So I feel very, very blessed today and every day. So I'm not a behavioral scientist, nor do I play one on TV, but I am somebody who has the privilege of running USAID now, and I am committed to working with my colleagues at AID to ensure that behaviorally informed public policy becomes even more central to our programs. A cautionary note for both my remarks and the panel that will be amazing that follows. While what we talk about today is going to sound at times so intuitive and so intrinsically appealing, low-cost interventions that have great outcomes, what could be wrong with any of that? Please hear this at the outset. None of us are yet getting the most out of behavioral insights, and we will not get the most out of them. We will not optimize in our programming and in our leadership if we do not depart in critical ways from business as usual, from the way we're doing things now. On the one hand, everyone knows, of course, that human behavior matters. This is not a novel concept, and all of us have in place insistence for a long time on people-centered design, as one example, paying attention to culture, emphasizing local conditions, right? This is, all of this we have kind of baked in, I hope, to our DNA, even if we sometimes are not perfect in our adherence to these ideas. These are very familiar ideas, and they're broad and they're helpful. An important part of the UN's work, an important part of that of USAID. But these ideas that I've just described, these broad principles, is actually not what behavioral scientists in London or New South Wales or Buenos Aires or New Delhi or Cape Town mean when they talk about making modern behavioral science central to public policy. And what we're talking about today is how can we achieve a delta at USAID, in development more broadly, at the UN, between where we are now and optimization and full use of what's out there. And because behavioral science is much more specific and more concrete than these broad ideas about meeting people where they are, about respecting local culture, about taking note of human behavior and adherence. Behavioral science is new. It is not old. It is not actually all that familiar. It is not what we have been doing all along. And really important to bear that in mind. Standard economic theory, which informed public policy across the board, stipulated that human beings are rational, that we are good planners, that we respond well to incentives, that we consider the long term as well as the short term, that when we are given information, we process it ably, that we are neither too optimistic nor too pessimistic, and that we have a decent ability to figure out whether risks are small or large. These are going in assumptions, and they were the predicates on which public policy was shaped and implemented for a very long time. Modern behavioral science has questioned everything that I just said. The work of psychologists Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky challenged conventional wisdom about human behavior, showing not that people are irrational, which is a kind of simplified way, maybe you might hear a simplistic way that people talk about this, but in fact that we depart from perfect rationality in specific and predictable ways. And we depart often instantaneously and unconsciously. So over recent decades, extensive research has shown, for example, that human beings focus on the short term, and we often ignore the long term. Research has shown that people can be unrealistically optimistic. We exaggerate some risks and ignore others altogether. Even in circumstances in which we know that making some change in our personal lives or in our community situation, even if we know it's in our interest, we have an often overwhelming attachment to the status quo. Inertia is an immensely powerful force on our daily lives. And again, I know this all sounds kind of obvious now, but amazingly, public policy was not predicated on these findings until very, very recently when behavioral science began to make inroads. The research has shown that we care about what is fair and what is perceived to be fair, which means that actually we will be inclined to sacrifice our material interests in order to comply with social norms. Social norms are an incredible weapon, actually, in our collective toolbox. So these findings have specific and concrete implications for our work. They suggest that our long-held intuitions about behavior might not just be a little wrong, but might be completely wrong. And if they are completely wrong, that is going to be harmful to our long-term development goals. If you take these findings to their natural conclusion, it would suggest that what we are now doing in a whole range of areas might not work. But this research also suggests very promising paths forward. Take, for instance, in Kenya, a country with an expansive public transportation network, but also frequently fatal bus accidents. Just in April of this year, a bus accident in southeastern Kenya left 15 people dead, an all too common occurrence in a country where fatalities from road accidents exceed 3,000 annually. These numbers represent people who rely on public transit for their livelihoods. When a pair of Georgetown University researchers, in partnership with USAID, set out to learn more about what was behind these accidents, they found passengers were not comfortable calling out drivers for speeding or aggressive driving. Turned out the social cost of being the first to complain was high. People didn't know if others would join them, especially given the desire to arrive quickly to one's destination. But the researchers found that specific reckless behaviors could be influenced by changing social norms. Our teams devised and tested a simple, inexpensive solution built on behavioral insights: stickers. By putting stickers on buses with the motivational message, "Speak up," people were made to feel more comfortable telling bus drivers to slow down. The results were significant. Compared to rates for buses without stickers, this straightforward and cost-effective intervention led to fewer deaths. People felt empowered to speak out. Road accident insurance claims fell by half, and claims involving injury or death dropped by 2/3. That pilot program has now spread throughout the country, and today 4 million people now ride on buses with these stickers. That is the impact that behaviorally informed initiatives can have on people throughout the world. The central premise of behavioral science is simple. To make progress, we have to understand human behavior, not on the basis of intuitions, but using new findings and concrete data. We must learn how the people we hope to serve act or do not act in response to everyday challenges. And rather than making assumptions or applying what works in one culture to another, we need to gather evidence and data from the specific communities in which we serve. From the pages of academic journals into the building blocks of actual policies, behavioral science insights enhance the potency of our efforts. They allow us to use pre-commitment strategies to help workers save more for retirement as they get pay raises later in their careers. This more than doubles average saving rates. Behavioral science helps us get more people vaccinated against COVID by recognizing that the accessibility of vaccine stations or facilities is half the battle. Behavioral science helps us develop more effective approaches to reducing greenhouse gas emissions by changing utility companies' default settings, allowing people to opt out rather than requiring them to opt in. The U.S. Agency for International Development works in more than 100 countries and is one of the world's leading funders of research and programs that incorporate behavioral findings. Our work has evolved to include insights from behavioral economics, human-centered design, behavior change communications, and the use of nudges, all of which, evidence shows, can save lives and improve livelihoods. Some additional examples. People's choices are heavily influenced by inertia, starting points, and loss aversion. We can use strategies like that I've mentioned, automatic enrollment, to make sure important programs are reaching more people. We know that complexity, jargon, and small print, two things that the UN may lead the world in, and USAID certainly can compete in that competition. Complexity, jargon, and small print can defeat the whole enterprise of increasing people's capacity for agency. We also know that pervasive features of life like poverty, hunger, and loneliness impose significant cognitive costs that make it even more difficult to solve problems. Simplification, reducing barriers to access, information disclosures, these are more important tools than previously recognized. Even when people do want to change, we have limited attention, and that stands in the way. So consistent and well-designed reminders that point to a desired destination can make a major difference in helping people remain focused on what they are trying to achieve. Graphic warnings, think of those on cigarette boxes, for example, or in ads, can address our unrealistic optimism and engage the instantaneous affective responses that drive so many of our decisions. The architecture of how options are presented greatly influences our choices. What people see first, whether it's a name on an election ballot or in a cafeteria, makes a big impression on our ultimate decisions. And finally, by invoking social norms, and particularly emerging norms, like more and more people are switching to clean energy, we can marshal the power of informational cascades, as well as our innate desire to be on the right side of history. When we apply behavioral insights, we are much better equipped to make a difference. Take USAID's global HIV prevention efforts. Women make up more than half of people living with HIV around the world. Yet, research shows that the stigma of taking pills and visiting clinics, as well as the complexity of adhering to a specific regime, causes many young people, many young women in particular, to avoid taking a once-a-day HIV prevention pill known as PrEP. If it's medical, you're sick, was the common refrain heard by our development professionals in the field. Remember, the old development models would have baked in the assumption that people needing life-saving drugs would pursue their own interest in obtaining them. But it turned out that there was way more than had been previously understood standing in the way. Simply funding more awareness campaigns couldn't get at these hurdles. After extensively engaging young women, USAID helped develop a way of delivering PrEP that fits into a routine and encourages women to generate a positive association with the treatment. Rebranded as V, PrEP is offered in a pill container that mimics lip gloss and would look normal in any makeup case. Taking PrEP is presented like any other daily self-care routine. What looks like lip gloss actually contains a full week's worth of medication. Text messages nudge participants to keep focusing on making themselves feel good by remembering to take the day's pill. And rather than asking women to embrace new rituals, staying safe from HIV is framed as being part of the already routine behavior of putting on makeup and looking good for your friends and family. I could not be more excited to take note of the success of programs like this, to see that what we are doing at USAID is only the beginning, to know how much more research is being done every minute of every day, research that we have the capacity to incorporate in our more than 100 mission areas around the world, 80 places where we have physical missions and 100 areas where we do programs, to have seen the World Bank adopt behavioral insights 6 years ago, to now see the UN Secretary General adopting this guidance. This is thrilling. And it's thrilling because in order to be faithful to the people that we are attempting to serve, in order to contemplate advances of the scale we know we need in fulfilling the Sustainable Development Goals and in fulfilling national plans and development objectives, we need to optimize. We need to lose the reliance on perfectly rational individuals. We need to inject this learning into our programming. It could not be a more exciting new frontier for us to work on together. The last thing I'd say is one of the behavioral insights I haven't really mentioned is about sludge. Sludge is needless paperwork burdens and administrative requirements that get in the way of beneficiaries actually coming to programs. For example, in the United States, students filling out financial aid forms, USAID, small organizations becoming contracting partners with USAID. There's so much paperwork that stands in the way. I know from my time at the UN, paperwork is a not insignificant administrative burden there as well. Here's an example where our own organizations can also function better within themselves. And so what's so exciting is to imagine behavioral science and the impacts it can make on our work in doing more work internationally, not just on our programs, but in the way our organizations run themselves. So with that, I'm really excited to hear the panel that's coming up. and feel immensely honored to be associated with the Secretary General's guidance and this launch of what is going to be a really important new set of innovations at the United Nations that makes a profound difference for people around the world. Thank you so much.
Great. Well, thank you so much. That really was a brilliant introduction to BSci Insights, and how we can enhance our program delivery, make our own organization more efficient. And most importantly, I think really the key takeaway is to make, by doing so, we make sure that our organization is more people-centered. It's not generic policies, prescriptions. We really think, I mean, it really resonated when you talked about that it's not one size fits all. You really have to contextualize in a local context and what people really do and think instead of what they should be doing, right? So that was really brilliant. Thank you so much. Okay, so so with that, then we will move on to the second part of this this session. Let me welcome additional panel members. We'll just go through in the alphabetical order. So first, starting off with Abdoulaye Marjay, known as Mar to many of us who have worked with him for many, many years. He's currently serving as Special Coordinator for Development in the Sahel. Before that, he worked as Special Advisor to the Administrator of UNDP. And well, I knew him most as Director of Regional Bureau for Africa. But he has long career with the UN as well, so I will not go through his entire CV. But one of the key highlights that I wanted to flag is that he served as Deputy Special Representative and Resident Coordinator, Interim Coordinator for the UN in Cote d'Ivoire. And I'm very pleased to introduce also Professor Cass Sunstein, and with a lot of gratitude to you, really, for your perseverance and patience. We met a few years ago and put the seeds of this idea of developing this line of work. And you have really helped us and guided us through the past 3 years, and now we see the fruit of your efforts. So Professor Sunstein is the Robert Walmsley University Professor at Harvard University. He was also previously Administrator of White House Office of Information Regulatory Affairs. And he's advised the UN, European Commission, World Bank, and many national governments, and also author of dozens of best-selling books. And last but not least, we have Maria Noel Baeza, who is a Regional Director for the Americas and the Caribbean with UN Women. Previously, she was Regional Director of UNOPS for Latin America, but she also had multiple positions in Uruguay's Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So, and Volker is also on the panel. And so with that, so the first round will be, I'll be asking a question each to each of the panel members. And then the last part of it is going to be kind of rapid fire. Whoever wants to take up the questions will do that. Okay, so the first question to Volker. If you could tell us, in which areas do you see most opportunities for applying behavioral science at the UN? I mean, there are many, as Administrator Power has already alluded, but yeah, what are you hoping for?
Thanks very much, Ayaka, and Samantha, fantastic speech, really great stuff. That's wonderful. And a particular tribute to Cass for having shepherded this process and been a fantastic companion and partner in crime on this very important directive, and really happy to have you with us. I think, you know, one of the big things that we are currently grappling with is we have to prepare the Common Agenda report for the Secretary General for the 75th anniversary. And we always come back to the social contract issue, because whenever we look at fragile states, but frankly also in the developed world, look at COVID and the pandemic, look at some of the processes even in democracies around the world, there is this issue of a fractured social contract. And so we need to analyze, and the Secretary General last year in the Nelson Mandela speech set that out quite clearly, the inequality issue, the inequity issue, but also this, frankly, the disconnect between people and the institutions that are supposed to serve them. And how do we actually bridge that disconnect? How do we deal with that bridge? with that disconnect? Why is it that some people feel that they're excluded from the social fabric, and why are they not engaged anymore, and why do they not be part of the political framework within which disagreements can be mediated? And so it comes, and I remember a very interesting discussion with Cass a couple of months ago. It comes to this sludge reduction issue, where, because when the citizen is confronted with the state, it's often through administration, public administration, through bureaucratic processes, and it's intimidating. It's sometimes not understandable, frankly. If you look at COVID and some of the responses, I mean, there's a lot of frustration that has built up, but also not just on the health side, but also on the socioeconomic side, when people have to apply differently and many times. So there, sludge reduction is incredibly important, and I think we will work into the common agenda report of the Secretary General precisely that issue, that governments have to take that very seriously in the way they see themselves interact with citizens or people to whom their jurisdiction applies. I mean, the other aspect is age gender diversity. In the humanitarian arena, we have very strong participatory approaches. We sit down in focus group discussions with women, with girls, with men, with boys, trying to analyze what we are doing. I think we need to marry an age gender diversity approach and a participatory approach with behavioral science much more, and get that into the feedback loops from people who we serve much better, and then really learn about behaviors and behavior changes that are so absolutely important on the SDG, Sustainable Development front, on the gender equality front, but also on the human rights front. And if we can do that, I think that would be quite big transformations that we could work on. Thanks, Ayaka.
Thank you so much for that. So the next question is to Professor Sunstein. What impact could be achieved through increased application of behavioral science in the UN? I mean, there's a lot to do, but yeah, what would be some of the key outcomes you would hope to see? I think you're on mute.
I was. Thank you for that, and it's a great honor to be able to participate in this. And to see the extraordinary work being done at the UN on behavioral science, some of it by people who aren't in the newspapers, who are making history in quiet. I'd emphasize 2 points. The first is climate change and Sustainable Development Goal number 13. And the basic idea is there are 2 behavioral science strategies that we are seeing in real time helping, and that much more could be done with. The first is information. So there are people in countries that have not been focused on climate change, who have apps on their phone that tell them something about air pollution or about health risks associated with how it is that day. People who would not normally be focused on air pollution so much, but who are thinking that they and their children and their parents are at risk, and seeing that there's an association between the technologies that promote those health risks and the technologies that create greenhouse gas emissions. That nudge of availability of information about environmental harms has created bottom-up pressure towards nations to attend to the climate change problem, and it has made the Paris Agreement possible and some of the Paris commitments possible to fulfill and go beyond. The second is data that we have on behavioral science in Switzerland and Germany that is astonishingly inspiring. It shows that if people are automatically enrolled in green energy, and I'm going to talk about Switzerland data right now, households, small businesses, medium-sized and large businesses, they all stay green. Even in cases in which they could save a little money by turning to a dirtier source of energy, they stay green. Now, this is not a mandate, it's not a ban, it's just a behavioral intervention that says you are going to be enrolled in green energy. If you want to save a little money and switch, you can. And people and businesses don't switch. That's happening all over the world, and it creates very significant reductions in greenhouse gas emissions. And better still, the data is suggestive that the costs of the intervention are crushed by the benefits of the intervention. So that's about climate change. My second idea, I want to echo what Administrator Power and what Volker Turk said about sludge. All over the world, and this is not necessarily programs, it might be about administration, we have waiting time. We have interview requirements. We have forms that are incomprehensible and lengthy. The take-up rates for some programs that involve counteracting domestic violence or that involve economic need or involve education and job training, the take-up requirements are such that the participation rate, even in countries where you'd expect them to be high, are 40 to 60%. And while I was a literature major, not a math major, I know that if the take-up rate is 40 to 60%, the non-take-up rate is also 40 to 60%, which means that there are countless people who have a life to change, their own and that of their family, that isn't being changed because there's a wall that's separating them from something transformative, and that wall is administrative burdens. If we could take that wall down, we could change lives. That's about programmatic improvement. It's also about administrative improvement. 2 for 1.
Thank you so much for that. Okay, so now Maria Noel, could you share with us some practical applications of behavioral science that UN Women has piloted and the impact that they have had?
Thank you so much. It's a real honor to be here with so important leaders in this field, and I'm so pleased that Samantha Power is in USAID to really implement this change in our world, in the developing world. I would like to share in particular first that our strategic plan for the next quadrennial will have an enormous focus on social norms change. And I hope that we can work together to really implement better behavioral science, particularly in the discriminatory bias, social norms against women, and finding the nudges to end violence against women, which is our most important worry around the world. But let me say 2 examples. One is what we have done in UN Women in Mexico, in the Behavioral Inform Award-winning UN Women Communication Campaign, which is called No es de Hombres, is not about men. It targeted men and focused on preventing and reducing sexual harassment suffered by women on public transport in Mexico City. It sought to generate real changes in cultural practices regarding sexual harassment, specifically the behaviors and attitude of men, and to promote a culture of zero tolerance. Exposure to the campaign positively influenced changes in the previous perception of women and men regarding sexual harassment. And after being exposed to the messages, for instance, men questioned certain myths that justified it. In the case of women, the campaign served to provide information about their own rights, what to do and where to report it, to strengthen their agency. The 3-year EU for Gender Equality Together Against Gender Stereotypes and Gender-Based Violence program in Armenia, Azerbaijan, Belarus, Moldova, and Ukraine that we implemented together with UNFPA aims to strengthen equal rights and opportunity for women and men by shifting social perception around gender roles, tackling gender stereotypes, and increasing men's participation in childcare and other domestic responsibility. One of our main strategies in the program is to research the best way to challenge gender stereotypes in order to better understand which approaches are most successful in achieving gender transformative behavioral change. So as you can see, for us, it's essential. And I would like to bring to your attention the care economy. In our region, the care systems is only starting. We have 1 or 2 countries, one being my own, Uruguay, that established care systems. And we are pushing for that in a global alliance as well with the Generation Equality Forum that will take place by the end of the month in Paris. And what we want is to put care at the center. And for that, we need behavioral science to really change the perception of what care is for women and how care can be a triple dividend, positive triple dividend for women to go to work, to really establish a network like the Biden administration is trying to do, putting the care system at the center of the economic recovery. This is what we're trying to do in the region, and of course with the Global Alliance as well. Thank you so much for allowing us to be here.
Thank you so much, Maria Noel. That was excellent. So Mar, I have kind of a double-barrel question for you. You have been an early supporter of innovation in behavioral science at the UN. So what were some of the biggest lessons you learned from observing, supporting behavioral science projects? And how are you planning to apply behavioral science in your current role?
Thank you, Ayaka. Do you hear me loud and clear? Ayaka, you hear me, right?
Yes, we do.
Yeah, thank you, Ayaka. Thank you, Tim. Thank you, friends. Let me preamble by saying that I am really thrilled to see the UN moving in the field of behavioral science and behavioral insights. In fact, for us, actors in peacemaking and in development, we have come to the realization that we have huge blind spots in our practice by not factoring enough the behavioral science dimension in our work. Behavioral science, i.e., the science of how people think and act, provides a promising complementary new approach to advance peacemaking, preventive diplomacy, and development. As a radical convert to behavioral science and a student of CAS when I was in UNDP, I am bringing behavioral science and insight in our UN work in the Sahel, most precisely by transforming our practice in the Sahel from ego to eco, i.e. from an obsolete ecosystem focused entirely on the vision and behavior of single actors or limited set of actors to an ecosystem awareness that emphasizes the well-being of the whole. So we shouldn't be just maximizing individual utilities, but optimizing collective well-being. And when I say collective, I include people and the planet. Most practically, we are pushing 3 behavioral transformation pressure points in the Sahel. Number 1 is changing the narrative in the Sahel itself to pivot from just addressing crisis to also advocating the Sahel as a land of opportunities, which it is. That's the way to nurture hope instead of always echoing despair, especially for the younger generation. And we are mostly doing that through the power of storytelling, using Sahelian influences, and I underline, paying attention to culture, as Samantha rightly put it. The second pressure point we are doing here is pushing for participatory budgeting, pushing really development actors, especially national governments and municipal levels, to move to participatory budgeting. Now, as budget is the most powerful policy instrument in the country, people's budgeting is deeply instrumental to strengthen social contracts. An increasing number of local and national governments in the world are now using participatory budgeting to help identify policy priorities and new context-appropriate policy initiatives. South Korea, for example, is an example to emulate. A country like South Africa has the mechanism for citizen participation written in its constitution. These are practices we are trying to move forward in the Sahel. Last but not least, pushing forward the nexus approach, advocating all actors on the ground, be they development, peace, humanitarian, and human rights actors, to move away from the crippling and irrelevant and depressing silo approaches to embrace the most highest return nexus approach. I call it the new contact theory, where interface with actors is a superior and positive sum game. And here I am seeing progress on that front. In conclusion, let me emphatically state that the Sahel can be the place where we can invent development and peacemaking. Behavioral science is a powerful tool to do so, and I count you all to join me in that journey of transformation. Then over to you, Ayaka.
Great, thank you so much for that. And these are early days, but we're definitely seeing the beginning of a shift. So thank you for steering this in the right direction. Okay, so now we will be doing a rapid fire round. So each panel would have 1 to 2 minutes to respond. So the questions are as follow. How can we best support the application and mainstreaming of BSI at the UN? Or what are some of the critical enablers for behavioral science to be successful at the UN? So why don't we do it in a reverse order now? So we start back with Maria Noel, Cass, and then back to Volker. So Mar, over to you.
But thank you, Ayaka, for coming back to me. For me, it's the power of the moment. It is great that the SG has released this guidance, but we need a big bang. If you want me to give a big bang, if I were the SG, I would just disconnect, dismiss, and suppress the compact that we have between supervisors and supervisees. A lot of bureaucracy, and it's a lot of verticality and not horizontality. Teams matter more than individual. So an SG has to come with a powerful message. This is it. No more compacts. I want teamwork. I want a team platform. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Amar, because you put it very, very nicely. I think the breaking of the silos is critical. Integrated policy advice. This is so hard to do in the UN, but we are trying to do it under the leadership of ECLAC, which is the Regional Commission for Economic Development, trying to gather around certain key issues. I'm sorry to repeat again, but the care economy, that for us is critical as the most important obstacle. But at the same time, tackling the barriers to female labor participation in the case that we're working together, and also the area of equal distribution of care, right? So those are the issues that we can gather together several UN agencies and work together under the behavioral insight data, but also transparency, because transparency is critical in economies that, I'm sorry, but we lack transparency. And what UN Women is trying to do is boosting innovative approaches and leadership to our internal processes as well, leveraging social innovation for gender equality based on behavioral insight and human-centered design and innovative advocacy and stakeholder engagement. So we cannot continue doing business as usual. We have to have a different way of acting, and we have to do it now, starting with these fantastic guidelines that will help us to move forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Cass?
KIC, and the acronym KIC is CIC. There's no K, KIC. And the first C stands for checklist. So we need something that has a checklist that clarifies exactly what behavioral science is, knowing that it's being made every day as well as being built up. So a checklist that gives clarity about what it is. The I in KIC is information sharing. So consistent with the previous remarks, we need to have silo reduction and information sharing. There is a behavioral sciences group at the UN, UN Innovation Group. Also, they are information sharers. We need a lot of that. And the last C in the KIC idea is capacity building. So resources are needed, people are needed, expertise is needed. To have a document of the sort that this guidance note is historic. It's an extraordinary moment in world history. Capacity needs to follow in its train. So let's KIC.
I like that. It's very, it's a great acronym. Good to remember. Well, before I bring back to Volker, I wonder if Administrator Power would also like to comment on these last rapid fire questions.
Thank you. I guess what I just would stress that there is a fair amount that stands in the way, right? I think we're like-minded here. We have more than 300 participants, many more who will watch later. It can all just sound so appealing, but there really is a lot that stands in the way, not only silos. I mean, this requires to really gather the data in a behaviorally informed way, requires more funding. The guidance document is the beginning. I'm going to look at USAID to see what a review of our policy and programs would look like. But, you know, if it were free and as effortless as it can sound in a discussion like this among like-minded, it would have been done a long time ago. So I think it's like the barrier analysis, not to get to sludgify, you know, and admire the problem and spend too much time diagnosing the problem. But I think it would be a mistake if people left thinking that this is some glide path, right? There's an awful lot of, I mean, the behavioral finding itself is how powerful inertia is, right? So if we actually just look at the question of changing the UN's behavior or USAID's actions, we should internalize our behavioral understanding to know how hard that's going to be. That's point one. Point two, on a slightly lighter note, is with all the expertise gathered in this meeting on making behavior change in a desirable way, could somebody help me convince Cass to clean up that mess on the desk that is captured in the video? I'd be very interested in a little some behavioral tips on how to reach that pile. Over.
It's actually a screen. I wanted it to be more dramatic and kind of trigger that reaction. My real desk is extremely neat and spotless. It has nothing on it.
There's virtual background for that kind of a thing. Okay, so back to you, Volker.
I don't want to reveal my desk or anything clear, so I'm sort of facing the windows. Look, I think there are two things: walk the talk. And there needs to be a commitment by all of us, I mean, within the UN's family to ensure that we use it. And frankly, you know, I'm chairing the Deputies Committee. We actually used it even before the guidance note came out in the integration study that we did, where we really looked at very deep analysis of why it is that we can't have a more integrated way of working together within the UN, development, political, peace, security, humanitarian, human rights, and the findings on which, I mean, these were, you know, behavioral scientists who helped us do it. They were really amazing, and we presented it to the Secretary General, to all the principals, and I think that really changed something. And I think this type of things we need to do all the time. We need to show that actually whatever we do, if we use that methodology, it changes our perspective. It can actually trigger a solution to sometimes a wicked problem. And the second is excitement. I think we really need to capture the imagination of people with behavioral science. It can become a very technical, not technical, but it can become something that is seen, you know, it's close to psychology, close to sociology. It may frighten people. So we need to break some of the barriers there. And maybe, Ayaka, it would be good to talk to Melissa and colleagues and find a way to compellingly communicate on behavioral science to colleagues at large, so that we break down a little bit some of the inhibitions that some people may have when they hear this, you know. So we need to make sure that we capture the imagination and the excitement of everyone.
Thank you for that. I mean, I think Administrator Power's speech goes a long way towards that demystifying. So first of all, thank you so much to all of you for being such an exemplary panel. You are both inspiring, but also practical. So that was just really great. And then now the question begs itself, so what next? we've launched this. So what is next? So here I would like to bring in the lead on behavioral science in UN Innovation Network, Mary McLennan, who has led the work to develop this guidance. So many thanks to Mary for all the hard work. So Mary, if you could just come in very quickly, because we have very little time left. If you could just tell us about what the next steps are. Over to you, Mary.
Great, thank you, Ayaka, and thank you all for the opportunity to present today. So as mentioned, my name is Mary. I'm a behavioral scientist, and I lead what's called the UN Behavioral Science Group. This is an initiative of the UN Innovation Network, which has been referenced throughout the session today. We basically bring together colleagues across the UN system, currently over 600 from over 40 UN entities in 60 countries, to promote the application of behavioral science. And to say as well, I lead this group alongside my colleague Johanna Joachim, who runs the UN Innovation Network more broadly, and who has worked on the guidance note with me and your team and the USG to get it over the line. So in terms of next steps to conceptualize the UN Secretary General's guidance note on behavioral science, I just want to go over a few enablers that have been identified from the data, from actually talking to 25 UN entities, as well as 12 governments and international organizations who have worked to an extent to mainstream behavioral science, so to leverage some existing best practices from outside the UN as well. So the first one is creating a culture that supports the application of behavioral science. So to echo some of the remarks from the panelists today, really ensuring there's an understanding of behavioral science by UN colleagues across the board, key concepts, ideas, as well as potential for impact, particularly having senior leaders engaged. So it's great to see this panel today with a number of senior leaders here speaking about the importance of behavioral science. Secondly, to strengthen behavioral science capacity. So in our review of the UN, we didn't see a lot of technical expertise. So this is definitely an area where we need more work. So this could be through training programs, hiring behavioral scientists, as well as through further partnerships within the UN as well as outside. Thirdly, supporting the application of behavioral science in more of a dedicated way. So as flagged by colleagues, really having support regarding developing strategies and guidelines for the ethical and rigorous application of behavioral science, particularly tailored to the UN context. There's been work outside with respect to frameworks in this space, but really for UN colleagues, and as well as helping colleagues support when it comes to actual projects themselves. And then lastly, fostering exchange, collaboration across the UN and beyond. So really kind of, again, breaking down those silos through discussions across the UN, looking at maximizing learning, building on existing experiences, avoiding duplication efforts. So these are all things that have been flagged to us from the UN system and ways we can work together collectively to address those. So those are the 4 enablers that I'm identifying, kind of echoing again what the panelists have said already. So creating a culture that supports behavioral science, strengthening behavioral science capacity, supporting in a more dedicated way, and fostering knowledge exchange and collaboration. So just to conclude here, a few notes about the UN Behavioral Science Group and ways to engage with us if you are keen. So UN colleagues, anyone can join, doesn't matter your level of expertise, from beginners through to technical, those who are technical trained, there's a space for you along that spectrum. Colleagues outside the UN, you're welcome to join in a non-observer role, in an observer role. We have colleagues from governments, international organizations, academia, the private sector, as well as civil society and many other areas. So please join and we can talk about ways we can take this work together forward and with collaboration amongst ourselves. And then lastly, just to note that this is the start of UN Behavioral Science Week, as was mentioned. So I encourage you to check out the agenda. There you'll find over 15 sessions hosted by 9 entities, as well as the UN Innovation Network. So these topics range from COVID vaccination through to peace and security, so there's lots there to explore. We'll be hearing from Professor Cass Sunstein again on Friday, for those of you who want to hear more from him, particularly about SLEDGE. We also have a session on Wednesday with Nobel Prize winner Richard Thaler, who will talk about his work that led to the Nobel Prize in Economics, as well as ways we can apply behavioral science to progress the SDGs. So with that, I'll conclude here and say thank you very much for the opportunity to share our work, and looking forward to engaging with you as we progress behavioral science across the UN. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Mary. So colleagues, please read the SG's guidance and the UNB site report. I think Johanna put the links in the chat, so they're available to you. And as Mary just said, please join the UNB site week. There are 15 events from 9 UN entities, so there's a lot going on. And please reach out to the Behavioral Science Group in the UN Innovation Network to learn more about behavioral science and find out how you can be part of this. So with that, many thanks to all the speakers. Thank you so much for for some of you, you're not just speakers, you have been a key part of developing this guidance. So thank you again. And of course, many thanks to all the participants of this webinar. It was really great to have you all. So thank you so much, and we'll wrap up here. Have a nice rest of the day. Bye-bye.